On May 6, 1942, the guns finally fell silent on Corregidor. For weeks, the fortress island at the mouth of Manila Bay had been pounded without mercy. Concrete batteries that had once symbolized American power in the Pacific lay shattered, their steel mounts twisted and blackened by fire. Smoke drifted across the island in slow, exhausted sheets. Inside the tunnels carved into Malinta Hill, men who had not slept properly in months waited for an order they already knew was coming. When the white flag was raised, it did not feel like surrender so much as collapse. American and Filipino soldiers emerged from the tunnels carrying what little they still possessed. Many were skeletal from hunger. Their uniforms hung loose, stained with oil, blood, and dust. But their rifles were still in their hands. M1 Garands. Some with cracked stocks. Some scraped raw by coral and rock. Some still warm from the last desperate firefights fought only hours earlier. As Japanese troops moved in to secure the island, they took stock of what they had captured. Ammunition. Radios. Maps. Vehicles. And rifles. Thousands of them. The rifles were gathered, stacked, tagged, and transported across the water to Manila. Among them were weapons that had fired their last rounds defending Bataan and Corregidor. Weapons that had shaped every engagement of the campaign in ways Japanese commanders were only beginning to understand. The Imperial Japanese Navy had anticipated this moment. Even before Corregidor fell, naval ordnance officers had been dispatched to the Philippines with specific instructions. Their task was not to manage prisoners or secure territory. It was to examine American equipment. Not in theory. Not from intelligence summaries. But with their own hands. These officers were not ordinary soldiers. They were engineers, weapons specialists, men who had spent their careers studying steel and tolerances, recoil and gas pressure. They had examined German Mausers, American Springfields, Soviet Mosin Nagants. They understood rifles. Or at least, they believed they did. When they first handled the M1 Garand, their reactions were mixed. The rifle looked heavy. Thick. Almost inelegant. Compared to the long, slender Type 38 Arisaka, the Garand seemed blunt and overbuilt. Its stock was chunkier. Its receiver bulkier. It felt dense, like something designed without regard for the weight a soldier had to carry across jungle and mountain. But when they balanced it, something felt different. The weight was not dead weight. It sat forward in a way that made the rifle settle naturally on target. The action moved in ways they did not expect. Smooth. Purposeful. Not refined in appearance, but refined in function. Intelligence reports had described the American rifle as semi-automatic with an 8-round capacity. But reports were words on paper. Words could be misunderstood. Exaggerated. Dismissed. Steel did not lie. American forces on Bataan and Corregidor had fought with a ferocity that unsettled Japanese command. The 14th Army had expected resistance to crumble within weeks. Instead, the campaign dragged on for 4 months. Every advance cost blood. Every assault stalled under rifle fire that seemed far too intense for defenders already starving and short of ammunition. The first time the problem had become undeniable was January 10, 1942, during the Japanese assault on the Bataan Peninsula. Japanese infantry advanced according to doctrine. Artillery softened the positions. Then infantry moved forward in waves, closing the distance under covering fire, confident in tactics that had worked repeatedly in China. What happened instead was slaughter. The defenders were Philippine scouts, elite Filipino soldiers serving under American command. They were disciplined, well-trained, and armed almost entirely with M1 Garand rifles. As Japanese troops crossed open ground, the fire began. Not bursts. Not isolated shots. A continuous, rolling wall of rifle fire that never seemed to pause. Men fell before they could reach grenade range. Officers shouted orders that disappeared into the noise. Company commanders believed they were facing multiple machine guns. There was no other explanation. Except there were no extra machine guns. The fire did not follow the familiar rhythm of bolt-action rifles. There was no pause between shots. No break in the cadence. It was just shot after shot after shot, aimed, controlled, relentless. Japanese units were cut apart in minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Fry, commanding the 3rd Battalion of the 57th Infantry Regiment, wrote afterward that the firepower of his battalion defied description. The Japanese attacked in waves, and his men simply kept shooting. He called it a slaughter, not out of pride, but out of disbelief. One American rifleman with an M1 could fire 40 to 50 aimed rounds per minute. A skilled Japanese rifleman with a Type 38 or Type 99 Arisaka could manage 15, perhaps 20 at the extreme limit of ability. The arithmetic was brutal and unavoidable. 1 American equaled 3 Japanese. A squad of 8 Americans matched the firepower of 24 Japanese riflemen. And the American never had to take his eyes off the target. The Arisaka was not a bad rifle. Far from it. The Type 38, introduced in 1905, was accurate, reliable, and rugged. The later Type 99 improved on it with a more powerful cartridge and lighter construction. Japanese soldiers trained extensively with their rifles and trusted them completely. The problem was not the weapon. The problem was time. The M1 Garand represented something new. A step forward that could not be answered by courage or discipline alone. Designed by John Cantius Garand at Springfield Armory, the rifle was the result of years of experimentation and debate. American ordnance officers had argued for decades about whether semi-automatic rifles were practical for general infantry use. Concerns about reliability, ammunition consumption, and manufacturing costs slowed adoption. But by 1936, the United States made a decision no other nation dared to make. It adopted a semi-automatic rifle as its standard infantry weapon. Production was slow at first. Springfield Armory built rifles carefully, methodically. But as war spread across Europe and Asia, American industry shifted gears. Factories expanded. Winchester was contracted. Production lines were redesigned. Workers were trained by the thousands. By the time Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, over 100,000 M1 rifles already existed. By mid-1942, when Japanese officers were examining captured rifles in Manila, American factories were producing them by the thousands each week. This was not just engineering. It was industrial warfare. The Japanese Naval Ordnance Team set up a test range on a bomb-damaged airfield outside Manila. 6 captured M1 rifles were selected. 200 rounds of American .30-06 ammunition were issued. Type 99 rifles were brought for comparison. The first shots were cautious. The clip slid into the rifle with a sharp metallic snap. The bolt closed automatically. The first round chambered. 8 shots followed in 7 seconds. The rifle recoiled smoothly. Casings ejected cleanly. The action cycled without hesitation. Every shot struck the target. Then the clip flew free with a distinct metallic ping, and the bolt locked open. 3 seconds later, the rifle was loaded again. 8 more shots. 7 seconds. The engineers stared. They repeated the test. Again. And again. Even average shooters, unfamiliar with the weapon, were firing 48 rounds per minute after minimal practice. Elite marksmen pushed past 60. Then they tested the Type 99. 5 rounds. 20 seconds. A smooth, practiced rhythm. 15 rounds per minute. There was no comparison. That night, reports were written with care and precision. They stated plainly that the American rifle gave one soldier the firepower of 3 to 4 Japanese infantrymen. They warned that this advantage threatened the foundations of Japanese infantry doctrine. The reports reached Tokyo on May 20, 1942. The army dismissed them. Spirit, discipline, and tactics would prevail. They always had. The Navy was not so confident. After Midway, after Guadalcanal, after report describing impossible volumes of American rifle fire, the Navy listened. Captured M1 rifles were shipped to Japan. Engineers disassembled them piece by piece. Measurements were taken. Steel compositions analyzed. Gas systems studied. Japan had tried to build semi-automatic rifles before. Every attempt had failed. Too complex. Too expensive. Too unreliable for mass production. But now the Americans had proven it could be done. By late 1943, the Navy authorized a desperate gamble. Yokosuka Naval Arsenal was tasked with creating a Japanese version of the M1 Garand. The engineers knew the odds. Japan's industry was already strained. Steel was scarce. Machine tools were worn. Power outages were frequent. Air raids were increasing. But doing nothing meant accepting permanent inferiority. The engineers began by copying everything. Every surface. Every angle. They quickly discovered the greatest obstacle was ammunition. Japanese cartridges were close, but not close enough. The M1's clip system would not reliably feed them. So they changed the design. The clip was abandoned. A fixed internal magazine was installed. 10 rounds. Loaded with stripper clips. Familiar to Japanese soldiers. Easier to manufacture. It was no longer a copy. It was a hybrid. By early 1944, a prototype existed. It worked. It fired reliably. It cycled smoothly. It delivered the same crushing advantage that had shocked Japanese troops on Bataan. They called it the Type 4. But by the time the rifle was ready, the war was already lost. American factories were producing millions of rifles. Japan could barely produce dozens. Production at Yokosuka was slow, sporadic, constantly interrupted by shortages and air raids. Parts were stockpiled when possible. Rifles were hand-fitted by skilled armorers. By the end of the war, fewer than 150 Type 4 rifles existed. Most were never issued. When American occupation forces entered Yokosuka in 1945, they found them stacked in crates. Perfect. Unused. Too late. American engineers examined them with a mix of respect and pity. The workmanship was excellent. The design sound. The effort undeniable. But war is not won by effort. It is won by numbers. For million M1 Garands versus 100 Type 4s. That was the real battle. And it had been decided years before the first shot was fired on Corregidor.